Lindsey, a founder and CEO who's ready to rewrite the definition of imposter syndrome. I created Who Made You the Boss to let you know that you're not alone. If you've been wondering whether your burnout is actually a sign toward evolution, or if perhaps there's something more to these challenges we face as leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs, you're in the right place if you're looking to embrace the challenges you once perceived as negative, if you're ready to own your entire story, and if you're working to level up your business in ways you never thought possible. You'll learn all of this and more by listening in and doing the hard work you know you were meant to do. So let's get started together today on Who Made You the Boss. Hey listeners, so today we have something a little bit different, and I am really excited about this because my good friend, Mayra Richards, who was actually my roommate in college, had approached me after listening to a few of the episodes and said, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions for you about your story, your journey, about some of the teachings that you're coming out with. And I want to ask you those questions. And I thought, well, if Mayra has questions, maybe fellow listeners have those questions too. So we're letting Mayra come on and interview me today. But the benefit is that Mayra is a literal therapist. So Mayra, please come help us solve all the problems. I don't think it's just going to be you asking me questions. They're going to have a lot of questions for you too.
Maybe, but I can redirect very
perfect
quickly because I'm a counselor, so I could just be like,
put on that hat.
Yeah.
So
thanks for letting me do this. Yeah.
Gosh, of course. I love the idea. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness around it. And you're now a podcaster, so it's always fun to connect with other people in the industry and in the community. But just our background and, gets to feel like talking to a friend.
Okay. Do you remember how we met? Probably Wesley. Is that true?
Probably. I truly don't remember much before the year 2020 at this point.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Yeah, I'd love to, your journey of how it all came about, who I knew you to be, who I knew you to be now. It's just pretty impressive. And I want to learn. So that's why I was like, I have so many questions. I just want to know and I want to learn. And I'm excited. So.
Well, I am too. Thanks for coming up with us. Feel free to ask away.
Okay. So I know your family. I know your dad owned Epperly Tires. From what year to what year?
I don't even remember. I say that. No, wait, he actually launched his tire company. It wasn't Epperly Tire at the time, the year that I was born. So he quit his job and started a company in 1989.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how that impacted you growing up, like having a dad as an entrepreneur, showing you that. And also I had that thought too of like having a mom who stayed at home, like how did you see her support him?
Yeah. Oh, those are good questions. So having a dad as an entrepreneur gave me the visibility of the career path to where I really didn't know any different. And even though my mom was stay at home, she was an entrepreneur as well, in that she sold cakes out of the house. She would decorate these amazing birthday cakes. So I got to see both parents really pursuing an alternate lifestyle versus like a traditional job. What was so impactful about my dad is that he was very transparent with my family. So I'm an only child, and family was extremely important. We would have dinner together every single night. And many of those nights, Dad would bring home conversations that had happened in his business. So everything from, the decision to, he had a partner at one point, the decision to split ways with a partner and rebrand, the decision to ultimately sell the company, and everything in between, right? Like when there's a lawsuit or when there's an employee issue, like everything was just very above board. And I call it my dinner time MBA because I didn't actually get an MBA, but I learned so much from my dad teaching me over the years. And then my mom staying at home, I always knew that I had kind of more the drive to, I wanted to work, I wanted to pursue entrepreneurship, but I at least got to see my mom still making that path work for her. And like I said, she made cakes out of the house. So I got to see two people who very intentionally chose the lifestyles that they wanted and they needed. And that showed me that it was possible to do the same.
That's amazing. Who do you think you get your independence from? You talk a couple of times. You tend to say, I'm extremely independent, which you are.
Yeah.
Who would you say?
So it's interesting because I think like at first blush, the easy answer is my dad, right? Like he's always forged his own path. He's like a big picture thinker. And I am so similar to him. And this would actually like cause problems a lot of times growing up with my mom and I, because it was like having two versions of David in the house, him and me. And, and then she would feel very, kind of different. But looking back on it, my mom would always instill lessons of saying like, hey, I don't ever want to see you relying on a man. I don't ever want to see you relying on someone else. And she was very intentional about telling me, like the path that she could envision for me in that way. And so I think some of it was, even though I feel like the nature part of it came from my dad, a lot of the lessons came from my mom.
Okay. We have some similarities. It's interesting that they would say that, right? Like your mom would be like, I don't want you to depend on a man.
Yeah.
And she didn't. But she found so much value in that.
Yeah.
And you don't. And that's something that you're going to pass on to your daughters. It's like partnership is good, but full dependence is not.
And I think you have to hear that from someone who is very dependent on their partner to know that that's the reality, right? Because my mom was very dependent on my dad. He was the breadwinner. She stayed at home. And so I know there were times that probably felt, like, could she make the choices that she wanted to make in life because of that? And they had a good relationship, and it was never like I've never seen like a man put his wife on an allowance or anything like that, right? Like I had a very like great household when it came to the freedoms there. But I think it was necessary for her to be the one to teach that, because I don't know that I would think to say those words to my children because I simply lived them, right? So it was helpful to hear them being said.
Yeah. And to know that your dad couldn't have done what he did because he's pretty successful without her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was such a traditional household, right? When it comes to the man is working and the wife is staying at home, raising the kids. But I mean, there's so much value in that caretaker role. Like that goes completely underestimated in terms of like, if you could actually put pen to paper and a literal value. I think I saw someone had done that the other day, that it was like, if this paid traditionally, it would be a $200,000 a year gig to be a caretaker. And, that era didn't really look at it in that way. Like, I think I think our generation is looking at it more of realizing, wow, there is so much value in that type of support, even in a traditional household.
Something that I've enjoyed listening from your podcast of, I can't even remember if it was somebody that a woman whose husband kind of does that for her. Like, she's like, I'm able to do all this stuff because he's the one that takes her to doctor. He's the one, I can grow this company.
Yes.
Because I have his support, and it's so important.
Yeah. That might have been the episode with Stephanie Noddy Olson. I'll link to it for listeners who haven't heard that one. It was one of my favorites too, but she built a beautiful company, and it was so interesting to see the way her husband supported her and she knew upfront to communicate it. I think that was really important for their relationship is, hi, I am going to be the most determined person you've ever seen at building this, and I'm going to need your support, and here's what it's going to look like.
So a little bit, if you can think back to college, you talked about how you won that contest at UGA, and that encouraged you to move forward. I think when our relationship left, you were going to be an actress. If I remember well. I mean, you had a lot of hats. You were like an actress and a writer, and
yes,
it's cool to see that now you do get to use aspects of that. Anyway, but tell us a little bit of what drew you to the world of luxury travel.
Yeah. So it's interesting. God, I forgot that there was like a big point in my life where I really wanted to act, or I really wanted to do something in like journalism or like, in front of a screen or something like that. And you're right, like full circle. Now I am. But, I had this kind of like entrepreneurial drive, and I had wandered into a travel agency for a brochure, and I accidentally walked out with a job. So it was not that like anything necessarily drew me to it. It was just like that college student, yes, of opportunity. Of course I'll do it. Of course I'll like mix brownie and cookie dough together at midnight because I can, right? Like this is what we used to do in college, just all the fun experiments. And so, yeah, it's all planned travel. But then I kept seeing like the business opportunities. And I will be honest, it was interesting. There was a point where I was an English major with an emphasis on poetry and a minor in theater and a minor in French. And my dad,
I remember that. I remember the French. Also,
my dad was like, what are you going to do with that? Right? Like reality wise, he was like, are you going to write Hallmark cards in French? And I was like, well, that sounds lovely. Actually, I'd love to.
Can I sell that?
Yeah. Why are you? But I just had a very practical, pragmatic father who was like, hey, if you want to like build something for yourself, I see that potential in you. Like he would always encourage that entrepreneurial drive. And so when I kind of wandered in this travel agency and I started working in the industry, I started seeing opportunity for building something. And then when I like got a hold of that, I just couldn't let it go. So it was like everything in my like nature was just marching one foot in front of the other, which was why I entered into that competition at UGA. It was UGA's next top entrepreneur, and the winner received funding from angel investors. So that like they were the judges for these investors, and there were like 3 or 4 different rounds of judging and all the levels that we had to go to. And I walked into that room as like the only female, only non-business major. And, I was just like waiting for them to laugh me out of the room. And like, I just kept advancing in the program. And they actually were so great in that they didn't usually place people. There was a winner and then there was everyone else. And they actually announced we would like to create a second place award for my company because it was amazing. Like they were like, we really believe in this, but we don't want to give you money because you can do this without us. And this would just dilute what you're building. And so it was like everything I needed to hear of, I can keep going.
Yeah. That gift of belief that you had from your dad, that you had from this people. I think that's what made you more brave. I think you've always been brave. You've always done the thing. I don't know. You were just so out there, like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to go for it.
Thanks for saying that. In retrospect, maybe it was bravery. I think a lot of it was just like ignorance and not knowing any better, right? Like sometimes it's a superpower to just even underestimate like how hard it's going to be. And maybe that's part of it too, Mayra, is like, had someone told me, okay, here's all of the challenges you're going to go through as an entrepreneur, as a female founder, all of these things, like, I don't know that I would have signed up for that, but because I didn't know any better, then it was just like, sure, why not? I feel this is what's important in my soul. So I'm going to go toward it.
Yeah. I wasn't like that. Not until I got older. Until I got older, I was like, if we fall, we fall. But you had that drive when you were younger. And I love that about you. It's like, we'll figure it out.
The figure it out part. And I still say that a lot about almost everything to this day, to the point where it sometimes becomes a point of contention with me and Jeremy, right? Like he's just like very like to the book, this is the way things are. And I'm like, no, but what if we came up with a solution that no one's thinking of? Like, what if we'll just figure it out. And there are times where that, I wouldn't say comes back to bite me, because almost always we figure it out. And then the times that we don't, it's like, well, at least we tried. Like, at least we explored every avenue. I'm a big fan, and I think this is really important for entrepreneurs, of not taking no for an answer. And I don't mean like going back and being like annoying and saying, kind of bratty or Karen-like, I'm not going to take that answer, but more of, if I get a no, I then start thinking about like, well, what are ways that I could make this a win for like all stakeholders? So myself, my company, the person who told me no, their team, like what are ways that I could actually think of a better solution that could get a yes because everyone wins? And that kind of thinking, I think, is what has helped really grow the business.
Wow. So what? So you won, you were believed in, you start believing even more in yourself. Then what happened?
Yeah. Then I just started seeing like the problems that needed to be solved in the industry. So first was a more modern and transparent approach to travel planning. So I started building the company. Next was a more clear-cut path to the career. And so I started building a mentorship program. Next was a type of company that could support fellow business people. And so I started building a host agency. So it was like always like every kind of evolution of what was Epperly Travel, what is now Jet Set World Travel, is an answer to a problem that I could kind of see in the marketplace.
Did you make the company that you would have left to work for when you were younger?
Yeah, I think that was always a drive for sure. Especially too, because when I first started in the industry, the first company I worked for, I don't remember if you remember this, Mayra, because we would have been like living together or at least neighbors at the time. The first company I worked for was so questionably ethical. Like it was so terrible. And the bosses were just not kind humans. Like they would talk about people. We would literally get like supplier partners in, and then they would leave, and the boss would be like, that woman was such a heifer. Like he would use this like horribly toxic, like insulting language about the suppliers, about my teammates, about like people that work for him, and like all this. And so I got to see a lot of like what I didn't want, and then build the company that I would want to work for sure.
Yeah. That's your entrepreneur kind of your problem solving. Like, I don't want to stay in this hole forever, so I'm going to have to create it. You know?
Yeah, 100%. If it doesn't exist, what you're wanting, then you always have the ability to create that.
You have to. Yeah.
That's the figuring it out part too, I think, is like looking out and realizing, oh, well, I can figure it out.
Yeah. You are young to begin with. You started this business very young. What were the biggest challenges that you faced as a young entrepreneur? And what would you say to anyone in their early 20s who's starting a business, any type of business?
So I do actually think the youth worked in my favor a lot because of the ignorance, like I was saying. There was just a lot I didn't know and didn't know to be afraid of. So I almost feel like if I was starting this all over again today, like, would there be more that I would be like hesitant on? I don't know. But I think it's really important for one, you've pointed this out a couple of times, that I had other people who believed in me. And so I got to like borrow their confidence, which is huge. I actually interviewed a friend of mine, Dara Brustein, who has this whole philosophy around borrowing confidence. And it's such a beautiful idea that like when you don't have it, so if you're like in your 20s and you have an idea and you're kind of nervous and you feel all of those insecurities and that imposter syndrome, and, you know, my take on imposter syndrome is that it's actually there because you're doing something good. But if you're feeling that, like, you can surround yourself with other people or mentors. You can find those individuals who believe in you and then kind of borrow that confidence. So like, I think maybe that really sped me up a lot. And then there's just that like relentless, like if you've got that, like, I cannot sleep until I do this type of like relentless need in your heart. So I feel that way. I felt that way about entrepreneurship and about building Jet Set. I feel that way about writing. Like, that's why I'm pursuing writing, because I just feel like there are times where I have something like buried inside of me that will, if I don't release it, it's going to like claw its way out, right? Like, it's going to come out in other ways that are probably not as healthy. So figuring out like ways to like let that big dog out on a walk versus like keeping it pent up and not ever pursuing those dreams is really important.
You're a really good writer.
Thanks.
I can't wait.
Oh, thanks.
I really can't. Yeah. I'm so excited.
That's my first love, you know, that writing my Hallmark cards in French.
I mean, we were freshmen and you came in and you were like, here's my book. You were freshman in college. Like,
yeah,
you were
it's interesting.
Read my book. And I was like, who is this girl? Yeah.
Isn't it funny? But I've never, like, it took me 15 years later to actually even begin pursuing the idea of publishing, of like actually putting that into the world. So like, I think you outside looking in are like, oh, this girl is really brave and pursuing like business or whatever. But like, there are still a lot of things that have been incredibly intimidating to me, that feel too vulnerable almost, right? And the older that I get, the more I realize embracing that vulnerability, it makes me a better wife and a better mother and a better leader. So the whole act of like putting my writing out there now is something that I couldn't do 10 years ago.
Yeah. I just went through a book launch with this author, Ruth Cho Simons, and she said like, hey, putting a book out there, it's like going out there in a bikini. You know, it's like you get people's opinions, and some of them are great and some of them are not, but you have to, like, if it's something worth doing, you have to do it. And that's what you're doing. You're like, whether it takes, you could have been like, well, it's been 15 years. Like, I'm not going to do it. Like, my time has passed or whatever, but you aren't. You're saying like, why not?
Yeah. I think a lot of this parenthood, motherhood helped a lot with this too. And I know you probably feel this way, that you've got 2 young daughters. So listeners, Mayra and I not only roomed together and have remained friends for, what is this, like 15 years now, but also had 2 little girls at like the same ages, right? So like we both have similar age children, both little girls. But as a mom to girls especially, I think it started becoming really apparent to me that if I don't model what I want them to be able to do with their own hopes and dreams, then they might not know that they can do that, right? So like if my hope and dream is to publish a book, like I need to walk that path so my daughters can see that it's possible. And the best parenting advice that I've ever heard was the desire to make your ceiling their floor. So like that just keeps me constantly raising the ceiling so that they know that the platform that they have to jump off of is so, far up that they don't have to go through all of that to get there, I guess. I mean, they're still going to have their challenges and trials, but
sure,
I want them to see what they're capable of because they've seen what I have done.
Yeah. And what a gift. That's the gift. The thing that you're going to give them forever.
Yeah.
Like we can't control much. I mean, I've sent you videos of my girls playing with powder in my house. Like we can't control much. There's nothing much we can control, but we can control in what you're doing. It's like, I'm going to show you that you can.
How do you advise people when they're in that like major control freak mode, when you just see it like written across their forehead and they just don't even realize that yet?
I'm very direct.
What would you say? Like directly, how would you?
I would say like, hey, you're striving at this point. Like you're striving to make something happen so bad that you will choke it down and you will kill it.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, that's really powerful. Well, I asked that because I think I had to learn because of the things that happened, like to the business and to my family and to my health, like all over that course of like 18 months. And I get asked a lot of times, like, well, how would you change things? I'm like, well, I was taught by life, but like it would have been helpful to hear words like that, right? Like I can tell that you are striving and you're actually going to be the reason that this like stops breathing because you're holding so tightly to it.
Yeah. I had this conversation recently with someone and they were like, oh, well, aren't you scared that if you get a partner or whatever? And I was like, no, because it's never mine. I come from the background, like I'm a Christian. And so it's never mine to begin with. It was never mine to begin with. And if I can allow somebody to come in and make it better, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Like it will be what it needs to be. But it won't stop somewhere because of me,
Right. That's a very mature and not control freaky way of looking at it. Did you have to like work to get there, or does that come naturally to you? Because you're wired in a pretty like you've always been like chiller than me. At the very
yes. I am
that's a lot.
I ever would be. I think over time, I think I've just come to so many points in life where I keep striving that now I'm like, I just can't. I don't have the capacity. We've both gone through really hard things in life too. Where I'm like, emotionally, I don't have the capacity to keep choking something to death.
Yeah.
Nor do I want that to be my legacy or what my girls see,
Yeah.
I'm going to change gears a little bit.
Okay.
I do want to talk about something that's very personal to you, something that you went through fairly recent, I want to say. You lost your best friend from childhood a few years back. And as a counselor, I think like and as a human, I know what grief does to one. I want to know how you process that and how that changed you as a business person.
There's so many layers to this. And you warned me that you're going to ask me this question, and still like even hearing it come out of your mouth is like, it just hits me, like every time I think about it, because it is recent, like this happened in 2019, but 2, I don't think that the feelings will ever change, right? You could ask me this question in 50 years and it would still hit in the same place, as with grief. And what was so interesting about this, so I have a close group of girlfriends. I'm one of like 4 girlfriends, and from high school that have kept in touch. We would see each other regularly. And Jeree, one of our friends in that group, had a stroke and passed away in 2019. And I was actually traveling at the time. So it was this like super surreal feeling of being in a totally different place. I was on this trip to Dubai and Oman and the Maldives. So like a very, very surreal setting I had never been to. And experiencing grief from across the world like that was so jarring because it like forced me to be in the present, as grief does, but in a destination that my brain was like taking in as new, almost to the point where it felt like a dream, right? So like when I think about this like initial gut punch of grief and what happened there, it was just such a complex situation because I almost felt like I could get on the plane and go back home and it wouldn't be real, right? Because nothing else felt real around me. So even just the very start of that grief, like the processing of it was such a strange encounter. And Jeree was always one of my biggest fans, closest friends, and
so fun. She was so fun,
like such a light. To then live with the knowing. So when I was in Dubai, her family asked me to write her obituary, and that was just, I think, Mayra, that was the moment that everything changed for me.
Wow.
Because I'm getting asked to use the gift that I have, which is writing. I believe that is my strongest gift out of anything else, and I'm getting to do it to honor my closest friend that we just have suddenly unexpectedly lost. It was a life cut short, so young. And so getting to do that and to then self-reflect on like, what do I learn from this? What would Jeree want from me? What do I need to be doing to put more of my gift into the world? Like that was the moment that I decided like, I've got to pursue writing. Like I have to move forward. Like you just never know when is your last day, what this looks like. And so that started changing the way that I did business because I wanted to put more of my gift into the business I was building. I wanted to put more of my gift into the world outside of that. And so a lot of the choices that I've made since then have been inspired by, the sudden loss of a best friend.
Yeah. It reprioritizes your life.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so interesting, like even talking to you about it right now, I can like feel like my stomach kind of like, like you feel it in your body in so many ways. Actually, I just want to share this with listeners because it was you that I learned this from, when you lost your mom. And I remember checking in on you at one point and saying like, how are you doing? Because you yourself are a young mom, and you're even younger mom at the time of a little. And I was like, how are you managing this? And you taught me about scheduling grief. And that was so fascinating. Will you tell everyone like how you approach that?
Yeah. It's been very helpful as, one of the guilts, I don't know, over the years, moms just feel guilty about everything, I think. But I was feeling guilty about Leona because she was so little, and I was, I was a mess. I mean, I think this kind of losses, a best friend, a mom, it's just so deep. It's like you're not her best friend anymore on this earth. You're not a daughter to her anymore on this earth. And it's just like a big shift of identity, a big shift of like, who the heck am I? And I couldn't keep going. Like I would wake up and I would do the next thing, but I couldn't keep going. So I met with my mentor, and she's the one that taught me. She was like, hey, you just need to schedule it. You just need to be like, I have to do life, right? From like 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., I have to do life. But in that moment when Gavin would take Leona up to take a bath, I remember I would just stay downstairs for like 10 to 15 minutes. And I would just sit there and I would be like, okay, heart, like what's going on? Like, where are you at today? And sometimes that would look like a big puddle. And sometimes that would simply look like anger or numbness. And sometimes my husband would come down and I was like laughing at Instagram reels because I needed to laugh. You know what I mean? Like I need it. So, and I was like, okay, my heart knows. I'm a big proponent of like, you can talk to your heart, you can talk to your body. And so your heart gets to trust you in that grieving period of like, you will come to me. You're not going to ignore me. You're not going to toss me aside. You will come to me. And it's this holy moment that I'm going to have, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 10 minutes. And then you wipe your tears away, take a deep breath, and you keep going because we have to.
Yeah. God, but you're right in that it causes such a shift because it's such a, like, I don't think there's a more clarifying or present inducing experience that is greater than grief, right? That like you are so fully brought to that moment and you feel all of the feelings in your body, like everything that you're talking about. I've never known to talk about it as like a communication with the heart, but that I think hits the nail on the head as to like what's happening in your body during that time.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it gets worse and worse when you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you start to like chuck through it. And then it's when like people come into my office 5 years later and it's like, well, I never cried about this. I'm like, well, now we're going to have to sit in like most of our sessions for you to release that pain because it's such great pain. And the only thing that we have to honor the people that we love when they're gone, the only thing we have is our tears. We can do nothing else for them except to bring our tears as the offering of how much we love them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you thought to ask that question in the context of like, what has that done in my business or to like me as a business person? Because like we try to separate those two things so incredibly much. Like this personal grief and loss over here has nothing to do with this that I'm building over here, but that could not be further from the truth, right? Like we are whole humans and should feel like whole humans or be allowed to feel like whole humans everywhere we're showing up. And so I think about that over the years since 2019, like the number of times that I've mentioned Juri in like a company-wide call is significant because like I think about like the anniversary of that passing in November. And I like to remind everyone else to like call your best friend today, you know, like what do you do? Like let's just use this to your point. Like, what do you have to honor that person? You have your tears. You have the ability to leave a legacy yourself, which I think is what it made an impact on me of like, what are you going to do with this life, Lindsey? Like what would honor Juri and the fact that she didn't get to live the rest of hers? Like what could I do to honor that legacy?
Is there anywhere that you feel her the most?
So I had this experience when I was on that trip. And yeah, this is going to make me cry. So this experience where we stayed at a place called Six Senses Ziggy Bay. And this is one of the hotels that I've always had a hotel crush on because you get there by paragliding. So it's like the coolest arrival experience ever. But the day that we were set to arrive to Ziggy Bay was the day that they were taking her off of life support. And so like, obviously I'm driving through these like mountain, like Martian cliffs of this desert in Oman and like preparing to go jump off a cliff myself, which I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't even know what paragliding was. I was just like, sounds cool. And so I'm just like beside myself with grief. And I'm like, I can't go jump off a cliff and say, wee, like I can't pretend to be happy right now. I'm talking to Jeremy about it. You know, like we're in the car ride. It's like a 2-hour car ride from Dubai. And I was like, I can't go do this right now. And he was like, well, what would Juri want for you? Like in this moment, you know, like knowing what's happening across the world right now.
Yeah.
And I remember like just spending time with that thought, thinking about it. And the answer was, I heard Juri's voice in my head and she had a nickname for me, which was Bird, because she thought I danced like a bony little bird. And so she called me Bird. And I heard, you were meant to fly, Bird. And so I was like, I think I've got to jump off a flipping cliff today in honor of Juri. And then the words, you were meant to fly, are when I feel most connected with her. And so when I'm doing something that is scary, I'm putting myself out there in some way, I'm pursuing something bigger that I actually felt the call to pursue when asked to write her obituary, I remember the word, you were meant to fly. And that's when I'm most connected.
And that's what you're doing.
Thanks.
You're grabbing that and it can change you. I think that grief can either make you better or it can make you worse. That you decided. And that is the theme that I'm hearing throughout this interview of like, you decide to grab the hard things and turn them into something good. You even, that's what you do with imposter syndrome. You're like, I'm going to grab this thing that is so hard, it's so painful, and turn it into a gift, turn it into a blessing for myself, for my kids, for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good note to end on, because I think that the only thing that we are left with is our choice. You said this earlier, like, what can we control, right? So much is out of our hands, but like, we can control the way we show up. We can control how we decide to hold on to hope in spite of outcomes and in spite of circumstances. And so taking those things that we perceive as negative, taking those obstacles and figuring out like, where is there opportunity, or at least optimism somewhere in them. It's not painting a silver lining, like everything is good. There is trauma, there is grief, there's nothing we can say that makes that better. But are there things that we can do to help other people because of it?
Yeah. Thanks you for doing that.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation today. This was really meaningful. If you've gained some valuable insights from listening to Who Made You the Boss, there are 2 ways we ask our listeners to show us some love. First, share this episode with a friend who you know would benefit. The more we impact others, the more we can grow our resources to impact you. It's a win-win, and it helps us a ton. Second, if you'll take a moment to leave Who Made You the Boss a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, that helps us continue to create meaningful work, and it just makes our day. Thank you, listeners, for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep being the boss of your own incredible story.